Hi guys, so I am here to do my summer TBR. I really enjoy doing seasonal TBRs. It gets me really excited about all of the books that I have the possibility of reading in the next few months, and despite the fact that it's raining and windy outside right now in Edinburgh, I'm pretty sure summer is on the horizon, so it's about time I filmed this. But you know what the score is, so without further ado, let's jump into my summer TBR. I'm going to start with the books I have physical copies of right now and then get into the books that I don't have physical copies of, perhaps because they're on their way to me or because they're ebooks or audiobooks. So the first book on this stack is a science fiction novel. This is The Disappeared by Christine Catherine Rush. This is the first in a series called A Retrieval Artist, I believe, a retrieval artist novel, and it sounds kind of like a crime novel meets hard sci-fi, and I'm really in the mood to dabble in more hard sci-fi. It's not a genre that I'm that well versed in. I have some sci-fi favourites for sure, but I would say like less of the hard sci-fi have I read. I feel like I'm just reiterating the same words over and over again, but I thought this one sounded really interesting because it has that crime element. We have two main characters on a space station, a man and a woman, that end up investigating a grisly vengeance killing. So that sounds really interesting to me. I picked this copy up secondhand from Armchair Books recently via their book bicycle delivery service in Edinburgh, and I would really like to get to it. I then have Sarah Waters' Affinity, which is a kind of paranormal, or potentially one of those books where you're not sure if it's paranormal or not, but ghost creepy story set in Victorian England, specifically in a women's prison. And on top of that, it has female-female romance rep, which is pretty common of almost all of Sarah Waters' books, and I've really been meaning to read more by her and become more well-versed in her literature in general, because it's the kind of genre and the kind of topics that I know I love, and I've read one of her books in the past and really enjoyed her writing style, so this should be really interesting. It's, like I said, set in a women's Victorian prison, and our protagonist is a disgraced spiritualist, and there's potentially some ghosts in this prison with her, so this should be fun. I'm really in the mood for creepy at the moment. I then have Gin Patrol on the Purple Line by Deepa Anapara. This book sounds so interesting to me. I've heard it's both like darkly humorous but also incredibly sad, so it's going to be a real roller coaster of emotions, I think, when I end up reading it. But it's another one that has a crime mystery at its centre. It's set in India, and we follow a child protagonist, a 9-year-old boy who's obsessed with like crime TV shows, and he's convinced that he could be just as good as a detective as all the ones he watches on TV. So when a boy goes missing from his school, he decides with his friends to try and solve this mystery, but it is an adult novel, so it's like a child narrator of an adult novel. A genre, the most popular example I can think of which is Room by Emma Donoghue, and I've really enjoyed child narrated adult books in the past, plus this plot sounds really interesting, so I have really high hopes. Then three books that I believe were on my June TBR, but it is still June, so I have time to read them. And the first one is Tender Morsels by Margot Lanigan. I've been meaning to read this book for so many years. I bought this copy secondhand years and years ago, and it's been sitting in Edinburgh. So now that I am here, I'm going to take advantage of that and pick it up. It also came up when I randomised my TBR for the Make Your Myth Taker readathon, which is currently going on, and I would like to act on that. It's a retelling of the Snow White and Rose Red fairy tale, which is a fairy tale that was one of my absolute favourites as a children. My granny had a like little picture book version of it, and I loved it. I'm pretty sure like I knew that fairy tale before I knew the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs fairy tale, so I think this could be really interesting. I also think Margot Lanigan's fairy tale retellings are kind of dark and possibly a little bit subversive, so I would like to try her writing, as I've been meaning to do it for a long time. We then have Crier's War by Nina Varela. This was a kind gift from my lovely friend Tasman, and it sounds brilliant. I've mentioned it in a few videos recently because I hauled it recently and it was in my June TBR, but if you haven't seen those, this is a fantasy novel set in a world where this race of beings called the Otome take over, and all of the humans are subjugated underneath the Otome. But our protagonist is a young woman who decides to infiltrate the Otome kingdom and kill their princess in order to like eradicate them and sort of overthrow them. But instead, I'm pretty sure she falls in love with the Otome princess. So it's like a high fantasy, high stakes romance between two women set in a fantasy world, and that just sounds right up my street. On the topic of queer rep, I have Witches of Ash and Moon by E. Latimer. This is a contemporary fantasy, so set in our world, but it follows a 17-year-old girl who's been training to be a witch all her life, and she's reached the stage where she sort of has to prove herself in some sort of trial. She also is struggling with OCD and like teen relationships. I believe, like I said, that there's queer rep here. I'm not sure exactly how that manifests, but I've heard fantastic things. And more than just witches, this also involves gods and goddesses. I'm not sure in what way, if like the witches have a relationship with the gods and goddesses, if any of our characters are gods and goddesses, but I'm excited to find out, and I've heard fantastic things. We then come to books I don't currently have physical copies of, but some of which I will, some of which I won't as the summer goes on. And the first 4 on my TBR are actually books that are all currently in Edinburgh, but I don't think I've mentioned yet on this channel that I'm officially ending my lease in London and moving back to Edinburgh until December, so all of my belongings from London are being transported up to Edinburgh at the end of June, and therefore I will have access to all those books again. So the books that are currently in Edinburgh that I know I want to read this summer include 2 which I've already started. So these are 2 books that I'd started just before I came up to Edinburgh but didn't bring up with me, so I'm halfway through both of these books and I'm really excited to have copies again so I can finish them. The first one is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, which is a contemporary literary novel about various different women's lives. I think all in London. All the lives I'd read so far had some connection to London at least, but women from very different backgrounds with very different experiences, and they're all like slightly tied together, so they're grouped in groups of 3, and each group of 3 women have a connection to one another, and you learn each of their stories and their thoughts and experiences, and then you move on to 3 more women. And like I said, I've already started this one. It's beautifully written and I'm really excited to read the rest of it. I also have Girls of Storm and Shadow, which is the sequel to Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Ngan, and this is a YA fantasy novel with a female-female romance that also very explicitly explores sexual violence and trauma and power dynamics within relationships. And the first book is one of my favourite LGBTQ plus books of all time. If you didn't see my video all about my favourite LGBTQ plus books of all time, that was on the list. And I started the sequel as a buddy read with my friend Kathy, but just never managed to finish it before coming up here. So I'm really looking forward to finally getting to the end of book 2 and seeing what's next in store for our 2 female leads whose relationship I am in love with. We then have 2 books I haven't started yet, but I'm planning on, obviously, and the first one is the Feminist Orchestra Book Club read for July, August, and that is Angela Davis's autobiography. So Angela Davis is an incredible political activist, feminist, socialist, academic, just all-round fantastic woman. I have so much admiration for Angela Davis, and I've read 3 of her books in the past. I think her non-fiction is so accessible and credible, and she has a really long history of being a very and she has a very long history of being an activist herself. But also one of the reasons that she became so well known is because she was wrongly incarcerated and was freed, and her whole trial became quite like a spectacle on the news during the civil rights movement. And this, obviously, as her autobiography, traces that experience as well as her experiences before and afterwards. So I'm really excited to just learn more about her personal life and her journey in this autobiography. And like I said, it is the book club read for the Feminist Book Club that I run with Lauren over at Reads and Daydreams, that I run with my friend Lauren, so that will all be linked down below. But yeah, super excited to be back reading some more Angela Davis and learning more about her life. Then another book that I've just kept thinking about that I know is in London right now and I really want to read is the Penguin collection of Japanese ghost stories. So if you haven't seen me mention in any of my videos recently, I have been loving my horror and spooky books. It's kind of what I'm drawn to at the moment, and a couple of months ago I picked up a copy of the Penguin book of Japanese ghost stories in foils, and now is exactly when I want to be reading it. For whatever reason, I just keep thinking about how much I want to read it, and I'm really excited to have my copy back with me so that I can pick it up this summer. It's pretty self-explanatory. They're traditional ghost stories from Japan, and in this series that Penguin does, and they're classics, and I'm just looking forward to reading it. Then we have one more physical book that I do want to get to but don't have yet because I just ordered it and it's still on its way in the post to me, which is Hadriana in All My Dreams by Renée de Pestre. And this is a Haitian novel, first published in the 1980s but set during the 1930s in Haiti. And it's about a young woman who gets turned into a zombie. So well on the kind of horror spectrum of things that I've been in the mood for. But it also sounds quite literary and surreal and magical, and I'm so intrigued. I hadn't actually ever heard of it before, but was on Jacaranda, the publisher's website, looking at their shop and read the blurb and just knew I had to read it, so ordered it directly from them. And yep, as soon as that arrives on my doorstep, I'm going to be picking it up. But that then brings me to ebooks and audiobooks. So I'm actually listening to an audiobook at the moment, which I plan to finish in the summer, obviously. And I'm about a quarter of the way through, which is Unicorn by Amrou Al-Kadi, which is the biography of Amrou Al-Kadi, a Muslim drag queen. And it's their autobiography about their experience of their sexuality, their gender identity, the rejection they faced, the discrimination they faced, becoming a drag queen, and what all of that means to them. It opened literally in the Edinburgh Fringe. The first section of the book was during a performance at the Edinburgh Fringe, which was so much fun and so recognisable to me because I have spent many summers attending Edinburgh Fringe growing up in Edinburgh, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I really enjoy memoirs as audiobooks in particular. Then the other audiobook on my TBR is The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson. This was also in my June TBR, but is the third book in the Truly Devious series, which is a YA mystery thriller series, and it's a series where the mystery is overarching. So we meet our protagonist Stevie in book one as she heads off to attend quite a prestigious boarding school that has a cold case in its history, and she hopes of one day becoming a detective, so plans to solve this cold case. But then some strange things start happening in her contemporary time as well. And in each book so far, because I've read books 1 and 2, you've gotten answers but also just more questions, and I'm so excited to find out sort of how the mystery wraps up in book 3, as I believe it does. I believe that mystery arc completes in book 3. And I loved books 1 and 2. I listened to them back to back in May and have just been really eagerly anticipating listening to book 3, so we'll be doing that ASAP. We then have Daughter of the Blood by Anne Bishop, which is the first in a high fantasy series that I don't know a terrible amount about. It's meant to be quite dark fantasy, but it just kept coming up as a recommendation to me. Anne Bishop just constantly kept being recommended to me, and this book kept being compared to the fantasy of authors like Juliet Marillier. Now I think it's a lot darker necessarily than Juliet Marillier, but I think the reason that they get compared is because they're just the same kind of high detailed female led fantasy that I really enjoy. So I don't know much about it other than it kept getting recommended, so I ended up buying it on Kindle, and my friend Ashley also has a copy, so we're going to be buddy reading it together, and I'm really looking forward to buddy reading this one. I think it's one that I really get a lot from buddy reading. We then have Blue Monday by Nikki French, which is a pseudonym for a husband and wife writing duo, but this is the first in the Frida Klein mystery thriller series. So Frida Klein, I believe, is a therapist, and she ends up getting involved in solving various different crimes or missing persons or murders in each book of this series. But why I picked this one up, and I've just realised it's an audiobook, not an ebook, so this is another audiobook, is because my friend Jen loves these books. She thinks they're absolutely brilliant and really great examples of the crime novel genre. So I caved, I picked one up on Audible, and I'm really excited to listen to book 1, which I think is the story of a missing child, a missing little girl, and Frida Klein ends up helping to find her. I'm not sure why, maybe she's a police consultant. I haven't gotten to that part in the story, but I'm looking forward to finding out. But then we do have 2 more ebooks, and the first one is Ring Shout by P. Shelley Clark. This is a novella. I really enjoy P. Shelley Clark's writing. I've read 2 of their books in the past, and this one is a sort of alternative history novel where the Ku Klux Klan is actually a group of supernatural paranormal beings. so it's like a magical paranormal twist on real American history. Like I said, I've already really enjoyed this author in the past, so when I got approved for this one on NetGalley, I knew I was going to pick it up immediately. I think it sounds really, really interesting. And then lastly for ebooks, we have Killing It Softly, which is an anthology of stories by various different authors. It's specifically a horror anthology of horror stories written by female writers. And I have read one of these writers in the past, which is the reason I picked up this collection, Elia Whiteley, and I love her writing. Her work is incredible, so I thought this might be an interesting collection because not only will I get a new Elia Whiteley story, but it might introduce me to new female horror writers that I'll want to read more by if they're in a similar vein to Elia Whiteley, and it's a fun way to check out a few different authors at once, particularly with something so personal as horror. Like, I'm very particular about the kind of horror I like, and I think everybody is, so being able to like have tasters of different authors is like a really good thing. I also have to say that I kind of hope a female-led anthology will sort of refrain on the sexism, which is unfortunately quite common in the horror genre and I do not enjoy. So again, just some high hopes that I'll discover some new authors in that collection. But that brings me to the end of my summer TBR. I would like to read more books than this because I am reading a lot at the moment, and there are definitely other books that are sort of like calling to me, but those were the ones that are sort of top priority that I'm probably the most eager to pick up for one reason or another. So let me know in the comments down below if you've actually read any of these books and what you thought of them. Are there any you're excited to hear my thoughts on in particular? And I'd also love to know what you plan on reading during the summer months. What genres are you feeling drawn to at the moment? Because clearly I want creepy horror for whatever reason. Am I alone? I don't know. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!